Caleb Hart, a retired veteran, escaped to a frozen hill above Lake Superior to regain control of his life. He organized his tools, measured his firewood, and trusted the silence more than people. Out here, nothing moved unless he allowed it to, or so he believed. Every afternoon, just as the winter light began to fade, a gray and silver German shepherd emerged from the trees. The dog did not bark. It did not beg. It didn't even look at Caleb. It walked straight onto the porch, sat beside an empty wooden chair, and stared out across the frozen lake as if waiting for someone who never came. At first, Caleb felt invaded, then unsettled. Then something deeper began to stir. This was not a stray. This was not chance. This was a ritual, precise, unwavering, almost sacred. What was the dog guarding? Who was meant to sit in that empty chair? And why did the dog's silent devotion feel more dangerous than the nightmares Caleb had fled from? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, because some stories don't just entertain, they change the way we see loyalty, loss, and the quiet miracles hiding in plain sight. Winter sealed the northern shore of Minnesota beneath a heavy quilt of snow so white and absolute, it felt as if sky and earth were arguing over which could be colder. Caleb Hart arrived on the hill above Lake Superior with a truck bed half full of tools, supplies, and silence. At 55, he carried himself like a man whose body still remembered discipline even when his mind wished it wouldn't. He was tall, though time had compressed him slightly. His shoulders still broad but sloped forward as if bracing against an invisible wind. His face was a map of weathered angles, sharp cheekbones, a squared jaw shadowed by a permanently rough beard he shaved only when it became inconvenient. His hair, once dark, had thinned and turned the color of iron filings, cropped short in a habit he never bothered to unlearn. His eyes were pale gray, alert and distant, the kind that seemed to be watching something far beyond the present moment. People once said Caleb looked intimidating. In truth, he had simply learned how to keep the world at arm's length. He had left Duluth without telling anyone. There was no dramatic farewell, no note taped to a door. The city had grown too loud at night, not with noise, but with memory. The apartment walls had started to feel too close, as if they were leaning inward while he slept. Every creak sounded like a warning. Every shadow seemed to wait. The hill above Lake Superior, with its isolated cabin and endless wind, promised something simpler: cold, work, and rules he could control. The cabin had belonged to a man who died quietly and alone, someone Caleb had never met. It was old cedar, darkened by decades of snow and lake spray, perched on a rise that overlooked the frozen expanse of Superior. The lake stretched wide and unforgiving, a slab of steel-colored ice fractured by darker veins where the water still moved beneath. The wind off it cut straight through wool and bone alike. Caleb liked that. Pain that announced itself was easier to manage than pain that crept in unnoticed. Inside, the cabin was small and spare. A single main room with a stone fireplace, a narrow kitchen tucked against one wall, and a sleeping nook barely wide enough for a cot. Caleb unloaded with the efficiency of long practice. Tools went on hooks. Food was stacked by type and expiration date. Firewood was measured, split, and arranged with military precision. He worked until his hands ached and his breath came out in steady white clouds until exhaustion pressed down hard enough to keep thought at bay. Control was his armor. As long as everything had a place, his mind stayed quiet. By the third day, he had settled into a rhythm. He woke before dawn, brewed coffee strong enough to sting his nose, and stood on the porch to drink it while the lake groaned and shifted below. He repaired a loose shutter, cleared snow from the narrow path down the hill, and reinforced the woodpile against the coming storms. The cold kept him honest. It demanded attention. It punished mistakes quickly and without sentiment. Late that afternoon, as the light thinned and the sky took on a bruised violet hue, Caleb was wiping frost from the cabin's front window when movement caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a trick of shadow, snow lifting in the wind, perhaps. Then he saw the shape resolve itself against the white. A dog. It emerged from the tree line near the lake shore, moving across the snow with deliberate care. It was a German shepherd, larger than most, its frame lean but powerful, the kind built for endurance rather than speed. Its coat was not the familiar black and tan, but a muted blend of silver, gray, and off-white, as if winter itself had chosen its colors. Frost clung to the longer fur along its chest and neck. The dog's muzzle was graying, its gait stiff in the hind legs, betraying age, 10 years, perhaps more. Its ears stood erect but relaxed, not alert in the way of a nervous animal, but steady, self-possessed. Caleb felt irritation flare, quick and sharp. He had chosen this place for its isolation. A dog meant an owner meant intrusion. He watched, expecting a shout, a whistle, some sign of human presence. None came. The dog continued alone, climbing the slope toward the cabin, as if it had done so many times before. Instinct stirred in Caleb, old and automatic. His posture changed, his shoulders squared, his gaze tracked every movement. The dog reached the porch without hesitation, its claws clicking softly against the weathered boards. It did not sniff the door. It did not look toward the window where Caleb stood. Instead, it walked past the entrance and stopped beside an old wooden chair positioned at the far end of the porch. Caleb hadn't paid much attention to the chair before. It was simple, sturdy, its arms worn smooth by years of use. Now, seeing it beside the dog, he felt an odd tightening in his chest. The dog turned once, aligning its body carefully with the chair, then sat. It lowered itself with a faint exhale and fixed its gaze on the frozen lake below. Perfectly still, perfectly silent. Minutes passed. Caleb waited for the inevitable, a bark, a scratch, a whine. Nothing. The dog did not ask for food. It did not glance back. It might as well have been carved from stone. "What the hell?" Caleb muttered, his voice rough from disuse. He stepped onto the porch, boots thudding against the boards. The sound echoed sharply in the cold air. The dog did not move. Caleb stopped a few feet away, studying the animal more closely. Up close, he could see the scars. Thin white lines across the dog's flank, a nick missing from one ear. This was not a pampered pet. This was a working animal, shaped by time and purpose. "You lost?" Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer wasn't that simple. The dog turned its head slightly then, just enough to acknowledge him. Its eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly calm. There was no fear there, no challenge, either. After a brief glance, the dog looked away again, returning its attention to the lake. Caleb felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. He had been assessed, dismissed, and deemed irrelevant in less than a second. Snow began to fall more heavily, soft flakes drifting down in slow, lazy spirals. The light faded further, the line between sky and lake blurring into a single pale mass. Caleb checked his watch, out of habit. Just past 4. As if responding to an internal signal, the dog stirred. It rose stiffly, stretched each leg in turn, and leaned forward to nudge the chair's runner with its nose. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. Then, without another glance at Caleb, it walked down the steps, retraced its path through the snow, and disappeared back into the trees. Caleb stood alone on the porch, the cold suddenly sharper than before. The silence felt heavier now, shaped by absence. He realized he had been holding his breath and let it out slowly. That night the wind howled harder, rattling the cabin walls. Caleb lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the lake crack and shift beneath the ice. The image of the dog, its stillness, its unwavering gaze, refused to leave his mind. It hadn't been wandering. It hadn't been curious. It had been waiting. Caleb turned onto his side, jaw clenched. He had come here to escape ghosts, not collect new ones. Yet as sleep finally claimed him, one thought pressed itself forward, unwelcome and persistent. Whatever that dog was guarding, it wasn't finished yet. The days that followed settled into a pattern so precise it unsettled Caleb more than chaos ever had. Each afternoon, between 3:40 and 4:10, when the winter light thinned into a dull lavender and the sky over Lake Superior looked bruised rather than blue, the dog returned. Caleb could almost set his watch by it. The German shepherd emerged from the same line of trees every time, moving through the snow with a patience that felt deliberate rather than cautious. Its large paws pressed deep, steady tracks into the white crust, never rushing, never hesitating. The dog climbed the slope toward the cabin, passed the door without so much as a glance, and took its position beside the empty wooden chair at the far end of the porch. It sat facing the lake, spine straight, head lifted, eyes locked on the frozen horizon, as if waiting for a signal only it could see. Caleb watched from inside at first, arms folded across his chest, jaw set. He told himself it was nothing, just an animal with a habit, but his body reacted as if confronted by a challenge. His shoulders tightened, his breathing slowed, old instincts surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. On the second day, he stepped outside before the dog reached the porch. "Hey," Caleb called, his voice rough, unused to addressing anything living. "You can't stay here." The dog stopped several feet away and looked at him, up close. Caleb noticed details he had missed before, the faint clouding at the edges of the animal's eyes, the way its muzzle dipped slightly, as if weighed down by years. There was intelligence there, yes, but also something else. Resolve, set hard like frozen ground. The dog did not growl, did not bare its teeth. It simply observed Caleb with calm detachment. Then it walked around him, not hurried, not defiant, just certain. It stepped onto the porch and sat exactly where it had the day before, aligning its body with the chair, as if guided by an invisible mark. Caleb stood there feeling foolish, heat prickling under his collar despite the cold. The irritation came first, sharp, immediate. This was his space, his hill, his hard-won silence. But irritation faded quickly, replaced by something far worse, curiosity. By the fourth day, Caleb had begun to document the visits. He found an old notebook buried in one of the cabin drawers, its pages yellowed and faintly smelling of cedar smoke. He sharpened a pencil and wrote as if preparing an after-action report. Time of arrival, wind direction, snowfall intensity, temperature, duration of stay. He noted the dog's behavior with clinical precision. No vocalization, no food seeking, no response to commands or physical obstruction. Singular objective, occupy position beside the empty chair. Caleb frowned at his own words. Objective. That was the word his mind kept returning to. Not habit, not instinct. Objective. At night, the lake groaned beneath its ice, deep, cracking sounds that traveled through the cabin floor and into Caleb's bones. Those noises had haunted him the first nights. Water, movement, unseen pressure, but now something unexpected happened. He slept longer, not well, not peacefully, but longer. The dreams still came, but they retreated sooner, their edges dulled, as if pushed back by an unseen sentry standing watch somewhere outside. On the 6th afternoon, Caleb decided to confront the problem head-on. He positioned himself directly in front of the chair before the dog arrived, standing squarely, boots planted, arms crossed. The wind tugged at his jacket, snow stinging his cheeks. He felt absurd, like a man arguing with the weather. The dog appeared right on schedule. It stopped when it saw him. Its ears flicked once, its head tilting slightly, not in confusion, but assessment. Caleb held its gaze, forcing himself not to blink. "You're not welcome here," he said, more firmly this time. "This isn't your post." For a moment, neither moved. Then the dog stepped to the left, walked behind Caleb with slow confidence, and settled into its place beside the chair. Dismissed. Caleb laughed once, sharp and humorless. The sound startled him more than the dog. He had not laughed like that in years. "Unbelievable," he muttered. That night he gave the dog a name, not aloud, but in the private space where names carried weight. Ash. Because of the dog's coat, pale and silvered like the remnants of a burned fire, because of the way it felt like something left behind after destruction, stubbornly refusing to scatter, and because ashes, Caleb knew, were what remained when everything else had been consumed. Ash. The name settled into his thoughts with unsettling ease. As the days passed, Caleb's irritation softened into something more analytical. He stopped trying to block the dog's path. Instead, he observed from the porch, sometimes sitting on the step a few yards away. He noticed the stiffness in Ash's back legs when it rose, the careful way it lowered itself beside the chair. This was an old dog, older than it first appeared. "Why here?" Caleb asked one afternoon, voice quiet, almost respectful. Ash did not answer. It did not need to. Caleb's gaze drifted to the empty chair. He had examined it closely by now. The wood was worn smooth at the arms, darker where hands had rested for years. It was not decorative. It was not abandoned. It was reserved. The realization unsettled him more than the dog ever had. On the 8th day, a storm rolled in from the west. Snow fell heavier, driven sideways by gusts off the lake. Caleb expected Ash not to come. He found himself watching the tree line with an attention that irritated him. At 3:57, Ash appeared. The dog trudged through deeper snow, its fur clumped with ice, breath puffing white in the air. It climbed the hill more slowly, but with the same unwavering purpose. It reached the porch, shook once, scattering snow, and took its place beside the chair. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "You're a damn fool," he said softly, unsure whether he meant the dog or himself. That night, the dream came back stronger than it had in days. Caleb was standing on metal that pitched beneath his feet. Cold spray lashed his face. Wind howled so loud it drowned out shouting. Someone was yelling his name. He could feel the weight of water dragging, pulling. He woke gasping, heart hammering, sheets tangled around his legs. Outside, the wind had eased. Snow fell gently now, thick and quiet. Caleb sat on the edge of the cot, breathing hard, palms pressed to his knees. Through the small window, he could just make out the porch. The chair stood empty. Ash was gone. The relief came fast and unexpected, and was immediately followed by something colder: disappointment. Caleb swore under his breath and stood, pacing the small cabin until dawn broke pale and weak over the lake. He told himself the dog would not return. Storms disrupted routines. Even soldiers stood down sometimes. At 4:02 the next afternoon, Ash returned as if nothing had happened. Caleb watched from the porch, snow crunching under his boots. He did not speak. He did not interfere. He simply stood there as Ash took its post, eyes fixed on the frozen expanse. For the first time since arriving on the hill, Caleb sat in the other chair. The wood creaked under his weight. The chair was cold, unforgiving. He kept his hands folded in his lap, unsure what he was doing, only that leaving felt wrong. They sat like that, man and dog, separated by an empty chair and an unspoken history neither of them owned. Caleb studied the lake. He thought of all the things people waited for: rescue, forgiveness, an ending that made sense of the beginning. Ash shifted slightly beside the chair, but did not look at him. Caleb realized with a quiet certainty that settled deep in his bones that this was not about territory or stubbornness. This was loyalty, and loyalty, he knew, was a weapon that never dulled. Snow fell thick that evening, heavy flakes piling against the cabin walls, until the world outside felt muted, sealed off, as though the hill itself were holding its breath. Caleb had gone down into the small storage shed behind the cabin, looking for extra lamp oil. The wind had begun to whistle through unseen cracks, and the light inside the cabin already felt too fragile, too dependent on a single flame. The shed smelled of rust, old wood, and lake damp, a scent that clung to forgotten places. He moved carefully, joints stiff from the cold, his breath slow and controlled, the way he'd learned to breathe when panic threatened to surface. It was there, tucked beneath a collapsed shelf of warped boards and fishing crates, that he found the tin box. At first glance, it looked unremarkable. Rectangular, dull silver, its edges softened by years of handling. The lid bore a shallow dent, as if it had once been dropped and retrieved without concern. Caleb almost put it back. He was not here to rummage through someone else's life. He had come to this hill to shed weight, not collect it. But something about the box stopped him. Maybe it was the way it had been pushed slightly forward, not buried entirely. Or maybe it was the quiet insistence he had begun to recognize, the same pull that drew Ash to the porch each afternoon. He carried the box into the cabin and set it on the small wooden table beneath the window. Snow tapped softly against the glass as he pried the lid open. Inside were photographs, letters, and a few folded papers tied together with fading twine. The photographs lay on top, their edges curled and yellowed. Caleb picked one up, holding it closer to the lamp. It was the porch, not as it was now, weathered and silent, but alive. Two wooden chairs sat side by side, angled slightly inward. In one sat an older man with a wide, unguarded smile, his posture relaxed, his shoulders rounded with comfort rather than age. His hair was white, thick, and unruly, his face creased by laughter rather than hardship. In the other chair sat a second man, broad and solid, his body built like a dock piling, thick arms, barrel chest, a heavy wool coat stretched tight across his frame. He wore a knit cap pulled low, a white mustache dominating his face. and his eyes crinkled at the corners in the middle of laughter. At their feet lay a German shepherd, younger than Ash, its coat darker, its posture alert but content. One of the men rested a hand on the dog's back, fingers buried in the thick fur. Caleb felt a subtle pressure in his chest. He turned the photograph over. Elliot and Ron, 2007. The names were written in confident block letters, the ink faded but deliberate. Caleb read them twice. "So," he murmured, "that's it." The chair. It wasn't empty because no one had claimed it. It was empty because someone had not returned. Caleb sat heavily in the remaining chair by the table, the wood creaking beneath him. The lamp hissed softly. Outside, the lake groaned beneath its frozen skin. He studied the photograph again, noting the way the men leaned toward one another, how their laughter seemed effortless. This wasn't the forced camaraderie of men who had survived something together. This was something older, slower, earned over decades. He understood then why Ash waited. That night, sleep came in fragments. The photograph lingered behind his eyes, the image of companionship striking deeper than the storms of memory usually did. When dawn finally arrived, gray and pale, Caleb rose with the decision settling into place. He needed supplies and answers. The drive into town took nearly an hour, the truck crunching over snow-packed roads that wound through bare-limbed forest. The town itself was little more than a crossroads, a gas pump, a diner, a small grocery that served as post office and bulletin board. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, thin lines against the winter sky. Caleb pushed open the grocery door, the bell chiming overhead. Warmth rushed over him, carrying the smells of coffee, flour, and old wood. Behind the counter stood a woman in her early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, her posture open and confident. Her hair was a mass of iron-gray curls pulled back into a loose knot, and her skin bore the healthy, ruddy tone of someone accustomed to cold air and honest work. Her eyes were sharp but kind, missing nothing. "Well, you must be the new fellow on the hill," she said, smiling as if winter itself had stepped aside for her. "Haven't seen you before?" Caleb nodded once. "Just moved in." She studied him briefly, not unkindly. "Name's Marjorie Hale. Everyone just calls me Marge. That cabin's been empty a while. Didn't think anyone would take it on." Her tone held curiosity, not judgment. Caleb appreciated that. As he gathered supplies, coffee, canned food, kerosene, he hesitated, then spoke. "There's a dog, German Shepherd, gray coat." Marge's expression softened immediately. "Ah, that'd be Ash." So the name wasn't only his. "She belongs to Mia Keller," Marge continued, leaning her elbows on the counter. "Ron's granddaughter, lives down by the old shoreline road. Sweet girl, tough too, lost her grandfather last winter." Caleb paused, one hand resting on a sack of rice. "And the dog?" Marge sighed. "Been going up to that porch every afternoon since Ron passed. No matter the weather. Mia's tried everything, fences, leashes, locking doors. Ash always finds a way out. Guess some promises don't know they've expired." Caleb felt the words settle like weight on his shoulders. Marge rang up his items, her movements efficient. "You should know," she added gently. "Mia worries herself sick, but she won't stop the dog. Says it's the last thing Ash has left of him." Caleb nodded, understanding more than he said. He left the store with his supplies and a name that filled in the outline of the story. Mia Keller, granddaughter, caretaker, the living thread tied to the empty chair. Back at the cabin, the afternoon unfolded as expected. At 3:51, Ash appeared. The dog moved slower today, snow clinging to her fur. Caleb watched from the porch, the photograph folded carefully in his jacket pocket. Ash took her place beside the chair, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady. Caleb stepped closer than he ever had before. "I met her," he said quietly. "Mia." Ash did not turn her head, but one ear flicked. Caleb took the photograph from his pocket and set it gently on the chair's seat, weighted by a small stone. The men smiled up at the frozen lake, forever caught in laughter. "For him," Caleb added. Ash shifted, rising with effort. She leaned forward, sniffed the photograph, then lowered herself beside the chair once more, her body angled just slightly toward it. Something in Caleb's chest loosened. That evening, as the sky darkened and Ash departed, Caleb did not feel the usual emptiness settle in. Instead, a quiet understanding took root. This hill was not just a place of escape. It was a crossing point between past and present, loss and duty, and for the first time since arriving, Caleb knew the silence had a reason. The storm announced itself long before it arrived. Caleb felt it in his knees first, a deep, grinding ache that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with pressure. The air grew heavy, muffled, as if the world were being wrapped in thick wool. Snow began to fall before noon, not gently but with intent, flakes large and fast, erasing edges and distances. By mid-afternoon, Lake Superior had vanished entirely, swallowed by a wall of white. The radio crackled with warnings Caleb barely listened to. He knew the word already: whiteout. The kind of storm that didn't simply obscure the world, but replaced it, turning sky, ground, and horizon into a single blinding void. You could walk 10 feet and disappear forever. He secured the shutters, checked the generator, and stacked extra wood by the hearth. His movements were calm, practiced, too calm perhaps. This was what he trusted: preparation, order, action. At 3:48, Ash appeared. Caleb saw her shape emerge from the trees, like a ghost struggling to take form. Snow clung to her thick gray and silver coat, collecting along her back and tail. She climbed the hill slower than usual, head low, nose working constantly. When she reached the porch, she did not go to the chair. Instead, she stopped. Her body trembled, not with cold alone, but with something sharper. Her ears flattened against her skull, and she turned her head into the wind, sniffing hard, then looking back toward the forest she had come from. A low sound vibrated in her chest, not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Caleb stepped onto the porch. "Something wrong, girl?" Ash looked at him then, fully, directly. It was the first time she had ever done that. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, held urgency, stripped of their usual, distant calm. She took 2 steps toward the door, then back toward the trees, torn between instinct and duty. The phone rang. The sound sliced through the storm like a blade. Caleb froze. He hadn't touched the old landline since arriving. He wasn't even sure it worked. The ringing came again, sharp, insistent, wrong, in the heavy silence of snow. He grabbed the receiver. "Hart. Caleb." The voice on the other end was strained, thin, nearly swallowed by wind. "It's Mia." He recognized her immediately from Marge's description, even without having met her. The voice carried youth layered with exhaustion, determination fraying at the edges. "I tried to keep her inside," Mia said, words tumbling over each other. "I boarded the back door. I swear I did, but she broke through. She ran straight into the storm. I went after her and Her breath hitched. "I fell. I slid into a snow trench near the rock line by the lake. I can't get out. I can't see anything. My phone's dying. Caleb closed his eyes. The image rose instantly, uninvited. White chaos, wind screaming, footing gone in a single misstep. He felt the old tightening in his chest, the pressure building behind his ribs. He had been in storms like this before, not of snow, but of water and steel and panic. He had known the moment when the body said go and the mind said no. "Stay where you are," he said, voice flat, controlled. "Don't move." "I'm trying," Mia whispered. "Ash, she'll come back, right?" Caleb looked at the dog standing inches from his leg. Ash's body was angled toward the door now, muscles tight, waiting. "I'm coming," he said. He hung up and reached for his jacket, hands moving before doubt could catch up. The oilskin was stiff with cold. He pulled on gloves, looped a rope over his shoulder, and grabbed a flashlight. His heart hammered, not from fear of the storm, but from something older, something that remembered hesitation and its cost. Ash pushed past him the moment the door cracked open. The wind struck like a living thing. Snow drove sideways, stinging exposed skin, obliterating depth and direction. The porch vanished behind them within seconds. Ash ran ahead, head low, nose skimming the snow's surface as if reading invisible lines. Caleb followed, leaning into the wind, boots sinking, slipping, finding purchase by instinct alone. The world narrowed to sound and motion. Wind howled, snow hissed, his breath rasped loud inside his hood. Halfway down the slope, it hit him. The panic surged up from nowhere, swift and merciless. The roar of the wind became another sound entirely. Water slamming against metal, alarms screaming, voices shouting his name. His legs slowed, his vision tunneled. He knew this moment too well, the second before freezing, before letting go. Caleb stopped. Ash doubled back instantly. She circled him once, frantic, then lunged forward and clamped her teeth onto his gloved hand. Not a savage bite. Controlled, sharp enough to hurt. Pain flared, clean and immediate. Caleb gasped. The world snapped back into place. "Okay," he rasped. "Okay, I'm here." Ash released him at once and bolted forward again. They found Mia 20 yards from the rocky edge, half buried in drifting snow. She was wedged in a narrow trench, one leg twisted beneath her, her dark hair plastered to her pale face with ice. She was smaller than Caleb had imagined, early 30s, slight build, shoulders narrow beneath a thick winter coat. Her skin was fair, now flushed raw by cold. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, lashes clumped with frost. "I'm here," Caleb said, dropping to his knees beside her. "You're safe." Mia tried to speak, but only managed a weak nod. Ash pressed close, whining softly, her body blocking the worst of the wind. Caleb looped the rope under Mia's arms and anchored it around his own waist. Every movement was deliberate, stripped of thought. Training took over where memory failed. "On 3, he said. 1, 2. Mia cried out as he pulled, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. Inch by inch, he dragged her free, bracing his boots against packed snow, muscles burning. When she finally collapsed against him, shaking violently, he wrapped her in his jacket and turned back toward the hill. The return was slower. The wind fought them every step, trying to tear them apart. Ash stayed close, circling, guiding, her body a constant point of reference in the white void. When the cabin finally emerged, it felt unreal, like a hallucination born of desperation. Inside, the door slammed shut, cutting the storm down to a distant roar. Caleb guided Mia to the hearth and built the fire with hands that shook, only after the flames took hold. He stripped her wet coat away, wrapped her in blankets, and pressed a warm mug into her hands. Mia's breathing gradually steadied, her dark eyes focused at last, landing on Ash, who lay at her feet, chest rising and falling in deep, exhausted breaths. "She always does that," Mia whispered hoarsely. "She never lets go." Caleb sank into the chair opposite the empty one, his body suddenly heavy, hollowed out. Outside, the storm raged on, but the cabin held. The fire crackled. Ash lifted her head once, meeting Caleb's gaze, not as a sentinel now, but as a witness. For the first time in years, Caleb felt the weight of a moment pass, without crushing him. Morning arrived quietly, as if the storm had used up all its anger in the night and left behind only exhaustion. Snow still fell, but now it drifted instead of struck. The wind had softened into a low, steady breath moving through the firs along the hill. Winter light crept in late, pale and honest, spreading slowly across the frozen lake below. Lake Superior lay calm again, a vast sheet of dull silver, as though nothing violent had ever touched it. Night had retreated, but not without leaving its mark. Caleb woke in the chair by the hearth, his body stiff and aching in places he hadn't felt in years. The fire had burned low, glowing embers pulsing faintly with heat. His right hand rested on Ash's broad back, fingers tangled in thick gray fur. He had fallen asleep like that sometime before dawn, his body surrendering not to comfort, but to vigilance shared. Across the room, Mia lay wrapped in blankets near the fireplace. Color had returned to her face, though her skin still held a fragile pallor beneath the flush. Her dark hair was loose now, spread across the pillow in uneven waves, damp from melted snow and sweat. One hand lay outside the blankets, fingers curled slightly, knuckles bruised and swollen, where she had struck the ice-hidden rock in the trench. Her breathing was shallow but steady, alive. The words settled into Caleb's chest with a weight that didn't crush him. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and stirred the fire back to life. The cabin smelled of smoke, wool, and wet dog, a scent that would have once annoyed him. Now it felt grounding, real. Mia stirred as he poured hot water over coffee grounds. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpened when she saw him. Fear flickered there briefly, the instinctive kind, before recognition replaced it. "You stayed," she said, voice hoarse, barely louder than the crackle of fire. Caleb nodded. Storm wasn't done. She tried to sit up and winced, breath catching. Caleb was at her side immediately, firm hands steadying her shoulders. Up close, she looked younger than he had thought. Early 30s at most, her features fine-boned, her face marked more by exhaustion than age. There was a resilience there, though, a tightness around the mouth and eyes that spoke of someone who had learned to endure loss quietly. "Easy," he said. "You took a hard fall." Mia glanced down at her bruised hand, then toward Ash, who had lifted her head and was watching with calm intensity. Her lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "She never leaves," Mia murmured. "Not when it matters." Ash thumped her tail once against the floor, slow and deliberate. Caleb wrapped Mia's hand carefully, fingers practiced and sure. He brewed coffee strong enough to cut through lingering shock, and handed her the mug, watching until her hands stopped trembling quite so badly. The day unfolded slowly after that, measured in small, deliberate actions. Caleb cleared the path from the door, shoveling snow aside in careful strokes. Mia rested, slept, woke again. Ash followed him everywhere, no longer keeping distance, her presence steady and close. When afternoon came, the hour passed without ceremony. Ash did not go to the porch at 3:40. Instead, she stayed. That absence said more than any ritual ever had. 2 weeks passed. The storm became something people in town spoke about in past tense, shaking their heads over coffee and weather radios. Caleb drove Mia down the hill once the roads cleared enough, watched as Marge Hale fussed over her with equal parts scolding and relief. The doctor confirmed bruises, mild hypothermia, nothing broken. Lucky, he'd said, peering at Caleb over his glasses. Someone knew what they were doing. Caleb hadn't answered. Mia recovered slowly. She insisted on returning to her grandfather's house near the shoreline, but she visited the hill often after that. Sometimes she brought supplies, bread, stew, a thermos of soup she said Ron had sworn cured everything. Sometimes she just brought silence. She was taller than she first appeared, slim but strong, her movements careful but unafraid. Her dark hair was usually pulled back into a loose braid, strands escaping to frame her face. She spoke softly, but when she did, there was purpose behind her words. Grief clung to her still, but it no longer ruled her. Ash aged visibly during those weeks, the storm having taken more than just energy from her. Her steps were slower, her rests more frequent, but her eyes remained sharp, alert, anchored firmly in the present. One afternoon, with snow falling light as breath, Mia climbed the hill carefully, favoring her healing hand. Ash walked beside her, no longer running ahead. They reached the porch together. The chairs stood as they always had. Two facing the lake, weathered, patient. The empty one waited. Mia stopped. She stood there for a long moment, shoulders rising and falling, eyes fixed on the chair, as though it might speak if she listened closely enough. Ash sat at her side, body pressed lightly against her leg. "May I?" Mia asked softly. Caleb, standing near the door, nodded once. Mia sat down. The wood creaked beneath her weight, the sound carrying through the quiet afternoon. She let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. Caleb took the opposite chair. The distance between them felt deliberate, respectful. Ash lowered herself onto the porch boards between the two chairs, her long body forming a solid, living bridge. Her head rested near Caleb's boot, her flank against Mia's knee. The ritual did not vanish. It changed. They sat without speaking, watching the lake breathe beneath its ice. A gull cried somewhere in the distance. Snow settled on Ash's back, melting slowly into her fur. Caleb felt something unfamiliar settle over him. Not peace exactly, but permission. Permission to sit, to stay, to not be on guard. Against memory every second of the day. Mia broke the silence at last. "He used to say this was the best seat in the world," she said quietly. "Ron, said if you watched long enough, the lake would tell you when to move on." Caleb swallowed. "Did it ever?" Mia smiled faintly. "I don't think he was in a hurry to find out." They shared a small, almost smile, not happiness, something sturdier. A distant sound rolled across the ice then, a low, resonant horn from a ferry making its slow passage across the lake. The vibration traveled through the air, through the porch boards, into Caleb's bones. His body reacted before his mind could intervene. His shoulders tensed, his grip tightened on the chair's armrest. The sound twisted, changed in shape, became another noise entirely, Metal straining, alarm screaming, water roaring in the dark. His breath hitched, chest tightening as the pass surged forward without mercy. Mia noticed immediately. She did not ask what was wrong. She did not speak at all. She reached out and placed her uninjured hand gently on Caleb's forearm, just above the wrist. Her touch was warm, solid, undeniable. At the same moment, Ash lifted her head and pressed her muzzle firmly into Caleb's clenched hand. The weight of her skull was familiar now, grounding. Two anchors. Caleb's breath shuddered out of him, slow and long. The sound of the horn faded into distance. The lake remained a lake. The porch remained a porch. "I'm here," Mia said quietly, not explaining what that meant. Caleb nodded, unable to speak. He loosened his grip on the chair. His shoulders dropped. Ash settled again, satisfied. The afternoon wore on. Shadows lengthened. Snow continued its patient fall. No one moved to leave. For the first time since arriving on the hill, Caleb realized he was not waiting for Ash to go. He was content that she stayed. As evening approached, the light drained from the lake, leaving behind a soft gray glow. Mia stood carefully, testing her balance. Ash rose with effort, stretching stiff legs. "I should go before it gets dark," Mia said. Caleb walked her to the path. "Come back when you like," he said. It was not an invitation born of politeness. It was simply fact. She smiled at him, this time without sadness clouding her eyes. "We will." Ash paused at the edge of the porch, looking back once. The chair sat empty again, but it no longer felt abandoned. Caleb watched until they disappeared down the hill. That night, he slept without dreams. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as thunder or blinding light. They arrive as a dog that refuses to leave, as a stranger who chooses to step into the storm, as a chair that was meant for the dead, yet becomes a place for the living once again. In this story, no voice came down from the sky. No angels appeared in wings of fire, and yet God was there. He was there in the instinct that pulled Ash forward when danger came. He was there in the strength that rose in Caleb when fear tried to paralyze him again. He was there in the gentle hand that grounded a broken man back into the present. Sometimes God does not remove the storm. Instead, He places the right souls beside us so we can survive it. In our daily lives, we often pray for our pain to disappear. But maybe the greater miracle is this, that God sends us anchors, a loyal heart, a quiet companion, a moment that reminds us we are not alone, even when we feel lost. If you are carrying grief, if you are haunted by memories you cannot silence, if you feel like you are sitting beside an empty chair in your own life, remember this. God has not abandoned you. He may already be walking toward you, through someone you haven't met yet, through love you didn't expect, through a quiet miracle disguised as loyalty. May God bless every soul watching this story. May He protect you through every storm. May He place faithful companions in your path. And may He give you the strength to step forward when fear tells you to stay behind. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment. Your words matter more than you know. And subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, love, loyalty, and quiet miracles together. Until the next story, may God walk beside you, and may no chair in your life remain empty forever.